Yeah, you're right.
Are you guys all set?
Yep.
You guys all set?
All right.
Okay. Anna, you all set?
Where's the flag? Right there.
Okay, I'd like to call this meeting to order at 6:03. Thank you. If you need copies of the agendas, they are up here, but I do want to start with a pledge to allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Roll call, please.
Trustee Pine.
Here.
Trustee O'Malley.
Here.
Trustee Bushner.
Here.
Trustee Lewis.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Ryan.
Here?
And Trustee Peck.
Not here.
Is he coming?
He couldn't
Not
make it.
here.
Gave us support. Couldn't make it.
Also present is Attorney Gilchrist and Attorney King.
All right. We have a couple quick things to take care of first. Old business. I'm going to introduce a resolution adopting local law number 2 of 2018. This is the zoning map adoption, correcting the original zoning one. No. Yes.
That's correct. The first thing the board will do will review the proposed Part 2 of the environmental assessment form and consider the resolution to adopt the negative declaration under seeker. That'd be your first step.
Okay.
Okay. So this is the resolution adopting a negative declaration pursuant to State Environmental Quality Review Act with regard to introductory local law number 3 of 2018.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. I'm not going to read all the whereas. I'll just go right to the good stuff at the end. Okay, so introducing this, and I'll be looking for a motion. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Village Board of the Village of Hoosick Falls in special session, duly convened as follows. 1. The Village Board of the Village of Hoosick Falls hereby determines that the enactment of introductory local law number 3 of 2018 of the Village of Hoosick Falls will not have any significant adverse environmental impact, and therefore adopts a negative declaration pursuant to the New York State Environmental Quality Review Act, or SEQR. Number 2, the Village Board of the Village of Hoosick Falls hereby directs that all filing requirements set forth in 6 NYCRR, Section 617.112B2 be completed. Wow, that's a mouthful. All right, so I'm looking for a motion to adopt this resolution.
Motion. Second.
Brian and second Bobby. Any discussion on this? Do we need a roll call on this one? Yes, we do need a roll call.
Yep.
Trustee Pine.
Aye. Yes.
Yes.
Ryan. Vanessa. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And the second one, the resolution adopting local law number 2 of 2018.
Right, and why different numbers? When a board introduces a law, we need to keep numerical order of the introductory laws. And when you act on them and to adopt them, we need to keep a separate numerical order. This will actually be the second local law adopted by the board this year.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, now therefore be it resolved by the Village Board of Trustees of the Village of Hoosick Falls in regular session duly convened as follows. Number 1, introductory local law number 3 of 2018 of the Village of Hoosick Falls being hereby is adopted as local law number 2 of 2018 of the Village of Hoosick Falls. And number 2, local law number 2 of 2018 of the Village of Hoosick Falls shall be filed in the office of the New York State Department of State in compliance with all applicable legal requirements, and the village clerk is hereby directed to cause such filings to be completed. Looking for a motion?
Motion.
Craig, thank you. Second? Brian, any further discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Kevin.
Yes.
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 Ryan.
Yes.
Vanessa.
Yes.
And Greg. Aye.
All right, motion passes. Okay, before we get to the meat of the meeting tonight, I do want to thank the Senior Center, Sean and his crew for helping out, and I want to thank DEC and DOH for being here. The first item up for discussion is a limited agreement, and I have a 3-page resolution. I'm not going to read it in its entirety, but I am going to read a fair amount of it because I think it sequentially explains what's been going on, what this means, and we've set up the meeting tonight to make sure that there are sections for people to be heard and ask questions at all parts. So I'm going to go through introducing both resolutions. and then we'll have a bit of explaining, and then we'll sort of open up the floor before we do the official votes on it. So this is the resolution approving agreement regarding payment by St. Cobain Performance Plastics and Honeywell for water and sewer revenue for village fiscal year 2015-16, 2016-17, 2017-18. And again, this is about half of all the statements, but I want to go through it. Whereas the village of Hoosick Falls has suffered and incurred and will continue to suffer and incur certain damages as a result of such PFOA, PFC, and VOC contamination. And whereas the village of Hoosick Falls, through its elected officials and retained legal counsel, have duly attempted to resolve legal issues pertaining to such PFOA, PFC, and VOC contamination as described herein, with representatives of St. Cobain Performance Plastics and Honeywell. And whereas such efforts by the village have not been successful in resolving all legal issues pertaining to the above described contamination in and around the village of Hoosick Falls, and whereas the village has nonetheless sought to have St. Cobain Performance Plastics and Honeywell pay the village for reimbursement of certain expenses and lost revenue previously incurred by the village as a result of the above described contamination, and has made demand therefore. And whereas the village has previously submitted an interim demand to St. Cobain Performance Plastics and Honeywell, totaling $707,396.62, including certain expenses and lost revenue, covering village personnel costs, fuel, electricity, and other direct expenses, engineers, and certain legal services, and lost water and sewer revenue related to the above described contamination. And whereas, in response to such village demand, St. Cobain and Honeywell previously agreed to collectively pay to the village of Hoosick Falls the sum of $330,251.48 for certain of these expenses previously incurred by the village, including certain direct expenses and engineering costs, but specifically excluding from such payment any lost water or sewer revenue, any costs of legal services, and certain village personnel costs. And whereas, in furtherance of such discussions, St. Cobain Performance Plastics and Honeywell have collectively offered to pay to the village of Hoosick Falls the sum of $195,478.50 for lost water and sewer revenues for village fiscal years 2015-16, 2016-17, and 2017-18. And whereas such offer by St. Cobain Performance Plastics and Honeywell to make such payment to the village of Hoosick Falls is made with the acknowledgement by St. Cobain Performance Plastics and Honeywell that the acceptance of such payments is not in satisfaction of all amounts claimed by the village to be due and owing from St. Cobain Performance Plastics and or Honeywell, and that the village retains all rights and claims that the village may have against St. Cobain Performance Plastics and Honeywell for all other costs and expenses, all other lost revenues, and all other damages incurred and which may be incurred by the village of Hoosick Falls with regard to the above described contamination. And whereas the village of Hoosick Falls acknowledges the St. Cobain Performance Plastics and Honeywell likewise reserve all rights with respect to all claims by the village for other costs and other expenses, lost revenue, and other damages not included in the previous payments accepted through the February 27, 2018 resolution, and the proposed payments to the village of Hoosick Falls as described herein. And whereas the Board of Trustees of the village of Hoosick Falls hereby determines that it is in the overall public interest and beneficial to the welfare of the village of Hoosick Falls to accept the offer by St. Cobain Performance Plastics and Honeywell to pay to the village the sum of $195,478.50 and to approve execution of a proposed agreement pertaining thereto, with the village retaining all legal rights relative to all other costs and expenses, other lost revenue, and other damages incurred and which may be incurred by the village with respect to the above described contamination, with the village not providing any release regarding claims for such other costs, expenses, lost revenues, and damages. Now therefore be it resolved by the Village Board of Trustees of the Village of Hoosick Falls in special session duly convened as follows. 1. The Board of Trustees of the Village of Hoosick Falls hereby accepts the offer of St. Cobain Performance Plastics and Honeywell to collectively pay to the village of Hoosick Falls a sum of $195,478.50 for lost water and sewer revenues for village fiscal years 2015-16, 16-17, and 17-18, incurred by the village of Hoosick Falls in connection with PFOA, PFC, and VOC contamination in and around the village of Hoosick Falls, and hereby authorizes the mayor to execute the agreement pertaining to such payment. Such approval and authorization is subject to the express condition that the village of Hoosick Falls retains all legal rights against St. Cobain Performance Plastics and Honeywell relative to all other costs and expenses, other lost revenues, and other damages incurred and which may be incurred by the Village of Hoosick Falls, which are not hereby being paid by St. Cobain Performance Plastics and Honeywell, and further upon the condition that the term of the agreement by which the village agrees not to pursue any further claim for the payment provided herein is expressly limited to lost water and or sewer revenue for village fiscal years 2015-16, 16-17, and 17-18 only. And number 2, finally, is expressly acknowledged that the Village of Hoosick Falls, St. Cobain Performance Plastics, and Honeywell have otherwise reserved all rights with respect to all claims for all other costs and expenses, lost revenues, and other damages incurred by which may be incurred by the Village of Hoosick Falls related to PFOA, PFC, and VOC contamination in and around the Village of Hoosick Falls, which are not hereby being paid by St. Cobain Performance Plastics and Honeywell, and which have not been paid by St. Cobain Performance Plastics and Honeywell pursuant to the February 27th, 2018 resolution described above. I don't need to take a motion now because I'm going to introduce the other one. Is that correct? Or do you want me to take a motion on this?
This one should be introduced and seconded and then open for discussion.
Okay. All right, so then I'm looking for a motion.
Motion.
Brian, second Vanessa. Can we also introduce the tolling agreement as well?
Keep
Okay.
that one open for discussion as well.
Okay. All right, so that is just sort of the specific summit focused only on lost water and sewer revenue and maintaining all other rights. Now, the second agreement, which I'm not going to read in its entirety, but I will read the last part and summarize and also ask Mr. Engel, our environmental attorney, to speak on it, is the tolling agreement. So this is the...
Can you
Yeah.
clarify exactly? I know there earlier today, resident brought up, just to clarify, yes, that, explain what is lost water revenue for the public to understand that?
Oh, sure,
If
sure.
we could
Before I
take-
go to this, yeah.
Different resolutions that you are.
Yes.
looking at,
Yes.
Then
They're
you kinda need
related?
to do this one first before you do the second one, if you're following Robert's rules.
Our lawyer, our attorney is,
Well, this is the town board,
Village board, yeah. Technically, it's sort of a revised Robert's rules,
Yes.
but I think I could introduce it, but we'll keep this one open and we
Yeah.
won't just open the other one up yet.
If you want
Okay.
to avoid any issue whatsoever,
We can just vote.
All right.
if you'd like to discuss the tolling agreement but not introduce the resolution, that'd be fine.
Perfect. Okay.
And then you can have discussion and then proceed
All
to
right.
act upon the first resolution.
All right, thank you. So just to quickly summarize lost water and sewer revenue, we went back and looked into the data of water usage and sewer usage in the village, both before and after the PFOA contamination broke, and we kind of used the beginning of the 2015-16 fiscal year, which starts June 1 of 2015, as the starting point. We saw a noticeable drop-off in water usage, so that was something we brought to the attention of the companies through negotiations, and I think that at the agreement that we had online, there's an Exhibit A that lists out all of that data. That's basically what the lost water and sewer revenue is. We expected a certain amount. Once the PFOA contamination became really well known, usage dropped off, and that's what we brought back to the attention. So that's specific to this agreement. Now, I won't introduce the tolling agreement specifically yet, but to talk about this secondary agreement, the second agreement, a tolling agreement is simply an agreement between the attorneys of both parties that they are not going to sue each other for a certain window of time. In this case, this is a 1-year-long agreement, except there's a 30-day notice that either side can use at any point, which states that I'm giving the other side 30 days to say that we are going to end the agreements. So what this means is, assuming it's adopted tonight and we sign and they sign the tolling agreements, that we are not going to sue at a minimum of 30 days and a maximum of a year. And that will be up to our attorney in negotiations to decide if we ever need to use the 30-day notice. Do you want to discuss anything else or summarize anything else about that?
Yeah, if I could. Couple of things. Going back to the first matter of the settlement on the lost sewer and water revenues, a couple of things ought to be understood. Number one, the numbers that appear in the agreement are exactly the numbers that we calculated, that is to say, village personnel calculated, and we provided to the companies. These were not numbers that we came up with and then we negotiated from some value to a different value. To get to this agreement, they accepted fully our calculations for those lost revenues. And as the mayor indicated, the first fiscal year in which the lost revenue actually shows up is fiscal year 15-16, and then follows the 16-17 and 17-18. Now, everyone may fairly ask the question, how did we get to this kind of agreement at this point? And the answer is this. We have, on behalf of the village, a lot of basis for suing these companies right now. And the companies are full aware of the claims that we are prepared to bring. They have expressed repeatedly that they don't want to be sued. And we got to a point about, well, it was in late May, coming into June, and I gave them a date. I said, look, we're gonna have something in the way of meaningful discussions, or I'm gonna simply, I had papers ready to go, and I said, look, we'll just go ahead and file the lawsuit, and we'll go ahead. In the meantime, they came back to me and said, look, we don't want to be sued right now. They said they wanted a tolling agreement. Everybody agrees to hold things as they are for a specified period of time. I'm not going to go into all of the discussions I had with them at that point, but the bottom line is that we were not going to agree to a tolling agreement without the companies coming forward with something in the way of a payment to the village at this point. And we were not going to agree to just a plain old-fashioned one-year tolling agreement either. This tolling agreement, which holds everything as it is unique in my experience, in that it does have this 30-day out period. So if a month from now or 6 weeks from now, we look at where we are with the companies in terms of further discussions and we go, there's enough of this, we're not making any progress, we can invoke the 30-day notice provision and immediately go ahead to file a lawsuit at the end of those 30 days. Now, I suspect if we were to do that, that might encourage some discussion, but I'm not going to speculate as to how the companies may react to that. All of that said, and I don't want to go on too long, but I've been involved in these issues over here quite a while. I must say that, let me make a couple of observations. Number one is this, as time goes by, and I guess the people from DEC will speak later, we learn more and more and more about the extent and severity of contamination over here in Hoosick Falls. And all of that is good information that will be of great usefulness for us if we have to eventually bring a lawsuit. Right now, my expectation, frankly, is there will come a time when we will have to bring a lawsuit. But in the meantime, more information is better than less. And for those of you who have been involved in this issue for a long time now, you're probably all aware of the recent report released from the ATSDR with the revised numbers in terms of what will be the new guidance values for PFOA in water. And that's an important development. And in some sense, I think we're fortunate that all of this new information is being developed before we've filed a lawsuit, because it will feed into that lawsuit if need be and give us a stronger basis for proceeding. Because in the end, both due to the additional information as to the extent and severity of contamination and the recognition finally from the federal government, or at least the ATSDR, as to the significance of those numbers, I think it strengthens any lawsuit that we may have to bring. So this is a limited agreement. We have given these companies no release, except of course we can't recover twice for everything that we are recovering by this, but every other claim remains alive. It should be recalled, we received a payment of about $330,000 back in March when they agreed to pay certain costs up to that time. The village incurs costs every single day on account of this condition. The village is paying for the electricity that runs the system. Village personnel attend to the system. obviously in this weather, nobody's paying to heat the building, but the village has costs every single day, and with each passing day as those costs accumulate, the size of the village's claims grows, and in fact, the claims renew themselves. So that's where we're at.
All right, thank you. To open it up to the people to be heard section, a couple reminders. When you speak, introduce yourself, state your name and address for the record. I just would like to get an idea of how many people want to speak so I can get an idea of how much time we need to use. Okay, we'll start, I'd say, with 4 minutes each. And would you like to go first? Yep.
Hi, Jane Ecker, Getty Place, Hoosick Falls. This agreement that we're looking to go and get passed today, I'm just kind of curious. It goes to 17, 18, but what's the contingency for 18, 19? Because I know people still aren't drinking water in the village. There's still going to be a loss of revenue. We're still going to have these fixed expenses to pay. Yet, are we going to have to do this all over again a year from now?
I guess I'm the person to answer that question. The answer to that is, if there's a loss of revenue for fiscal year 18-19, that becomes part of the claim. Look, if we have to sue them, we will sue them. At some point, our hope is either if we have to go through full litigation or we finally settle everything, the companies will pay a sufficient amount to make the village whole. But this is a very limited agreement right now, and it only takes us through the actual experience for the specified 3-year period.
And the other point to that is that we won't even have the data for the first third of the year until probably October when the readings are collected, so we won't know at this point what those readings will be.
So this is based primarily on the village budget, has nothing to do with the depreciation of the housing loss and anything else that's incurred by the village itself. It's strictly based on the village budget revenue loss.
Correct, it's just that one aspect.
So
Yes.
if anybody wanted to go after them for their home evaluation, whole other issue.
Yep, and that would probably all be tied to the larger legal battle that's going on, but that's not village business, that's individual business.
Correct.
Yep. Thank you. Yes.
Doug Sauer, 95 Classic Street. 2 issues. One, I would prefer to hear the second half of this before we voted on this. Because that talks about the context and where things are. Secondly, I want to decouple these 2 things. Because the issue of them paying us for our water losses is one thing. The other issue of the deal being made appears, well, we don't have to, we'll give 30 days notice if we sue. There's a year here that we got to go. Every day that this happens, our property depreciates. Businesses are a problem. Every time we're on TV, it's an issue. So if we're voting on one issue of just straight to water, that's fine. If the deal that was made was we approved the second in order to approve the first, I have to object.
Okay. All right.
You reach agreements by five.
Is there 2 resolutions separate? That's the
Yes, there's
Yes.
2.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yes, there are 2 separate resolutions.
Look, there are 2 separate resolutions, but let me make something very clear, all right? You can separate the resolutions on your side. The companies on their side regard the 2 matters as coupled. Now, look, please, I've been doing this kind of stuff for a very long
We
time.
live in this village.
I understand that. Getting this money from the village, for the village right now, the lost revenue, is an important thing for the village. That tolling agreement, I practiced law for 43 years. It is more porous than you can imagine. We give up nothing. And, you know, we're going to go ahead, we're going to have discussions with the companies over the summer. We'll see how they go. I've had a complaint ready to go, teed up on my system in my office for, frankly, close to a year now. Every day that goes by, we learn more. The complaint that we have in draft today is different than the one we had 6 weeks ago, and certainly different than the one we had 6 months ago. And we are better informed, and our case is stronger now than it's ever been. You know, we are in a position where we can take advantage of new data, new information. That's very important to us. The companies asked for a tolling agreement, and they indicated a willingness to pay that amount of money. Now, we could go back to them and we could say no deal. I would strongly advise against doing that, because this is a small step, but nonetheless a step in the right direction. It is progress. And I can only tell you, based on my own experience, that I think there is more to come. Now, what will be forthcoming, we'll see. But we ought to be plucking off issues sooner rather than later. Now, as to these separate issues of devaluation of property, the village is going after these companies as the village, as a municipal corporate entity. If you have a claim against the company for what they've done to your property or what they've done to your health, that is a matter to be pursued privately. And indeed, I can tell you my law firm has done that for certain people in this community. But the village is not acting here on that kind of an issue. It's a separate issue. It's certainly related. But I will also note that any individual claims that people may have are certainly stronger now than they were months ago, because we simply have more information, more data, more medical information than we've ever had. So, you know, don't look at the passage of time as being a problem necessarily. In some sense, it's an opportunity.
In all due respect, there should be one resolution. The first agreement should state that we're going to be here in 30 days instead of separating it, because the deal was made that they have to come together. That's what I'm hearing. So that whole first resolution you read has nothing to do with a time limit, 30 days, it frees us. But I'm hearing a deal was made that they have to come together. That's what I'm hearing.
Can I ask you a question?
Two resolutions are one.
Let me ask you a question, and I don't want to get into a long colloquy. What is your apprehension? What is your
That
concern?
there's two separate resolutions here. They pay for the water damage every day on the second part that goes by, this village gets hurt. I don't like the year, the 30 days. There's a deal that was made here. There was a deal. And you separated it into two resolutions, and you're arguing they both have to go together.
I have indicated to you the following. You can do one resolution and not the other.
Yes.
Okay? But if you do the one resolution and you don't do the tolling agreement,
There was a deal, right?
of course, what do you think a
Okay,
settlement?
that's
what
what
do
I
you
want to
think?
be real clear here.
What do you think an agreement
That's
is?
what well, the agreement was one resolution that I heard read, which I could fully favor. The second piece is, here's the deal to them. There's a year or 30 days notice, that we get harmed every day that we're in this community, that this is an issue.
I think just to quickly summarize this, there's a negotiation. This side wanted this side wanted that. We're presenting
You
it
didn't put it in one resolution, why?
because we wanted to vote on them separately,
Yeah, why?
so that we had all the options available.
You don't have all the options. You're being recommended they have to come together as a package.
No, those are options. We vote on them as a body. That's, yeah. All right. Thank you. I want to move on. So we had two others. One, and who is the two? Okay. Yep.
Hi, Jennifer Clufay, 115 Rogers Ave. Just for my own clarification, and maybe this might be helpful for others, I'm not sure. I'm trying to understand why the village would want to recoup loss in water revenue dating back June 1st of 2015, when the announcement that the water was not good to drink didn't come until much later in the year.
The announcement came in late October, early November of 2015.
Yeah.
And the question is, why is that tied in? And the basic answer is we looked at the data, and there was a sharp drop-off starting there. Now, even though starting in June. And
Well, it's a function of the fiscal years.
yeah.
These were analyzed by fiscal
Right,
years.
I'm just asking for clarification,
Right.
because I moved here in November, And so I know that the announcement was made at that point, and so it's confusing, it was confusing to me
Right.
why there would be a drop-off in water revenue
Actually,
prior to the
To
announcement.
be clear, EPA stepped in November, but there was a letter that was sent, although it may not have raised an alarm. When
Yeah.
was the initial letter sent with the water bill?
Well, I mean, the I know what you're asking.
Yeah.
So
It's,
first off, it's tied to the fiscal year, but at the same time, prior to November's letter from EPA saying not to drink, people already knew and people had already made their own decision not to drink.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, that's the first I have heard of that, because I heard that the leaflets that went into the water bills were very much benign in language, and most people ignored those, including the person who sold me my house.
Can you be
That's,
brief?
that was one.
Can I offer a further explanation on this?
Sure.
The explanation is as simple as this. We looked at fiscal year 14-15 and compared it to previous experience and what was anticipated. And that number was basically unchanged from what was anticipated. We then looked at fiscal year 15-16, and there was a sharp decline. Now, I don't think looking at fiscal year 15-16 in its entirety, anyone was looking at when the curtailment in water use occurred within that one-year window. All we know is that the revenue based on use in fiscal year 15-16 was significantly lower than would have been anticipated in the absence of the PFOA condition. So it's not a question of saying, oh, people stopped drinking the water or they cut back on June 1st. No, June 1st was the first day, am I correct, of the fiscal year.
Yeah.
So the year you were analyzing was June 1 to May 31.
Right.
I would not read into that any significance to June 1 in terms of when people began to curtail their use of water, because we simply don't know. The analysis doesn't reveal that.
Right, but we had somebody mention those letters that came in the mail in water bills as being a possible reason people stopped drinking the water prior to the major announcement.
No, I was
Yeah.
clarifying that when the EPA announced, because you had said it was announced in November. I just want to be clear, the EPA stepped in then, but it had been announced previously. I made no comment on it impacting anybody or not.
There was no public pronouncement by
No.
any governmental entity until later in 15 advising in unequivocal terms against drinking the water.
Correct.
So the numbers we're talking about are simply what were the revenues for the stated 3-year periods and what would they have been in the absence of the problem. There is no like detailed analysis that looks day to day and it is based upon demand on a sort of moment-to-moment basis. It's
And
not that kind of thing at all.
Just one last detail on that. The surprising thing that I found was that it wasn't just residential usage that dropped off. The industrial usage dropped off very sharply as well.
So just the, kind of the back half of that question is, this goes through fiscal year 2017, so June 1st,
17-18
17, 18.
Yep.
So June 1st, 17 to May 30th.
to May 31st of
or
30th,
2018.
whatever it is. Yeah.
So the long-term filtration system was up and running when?
It was right before we started, right?
So it was just before we started.
So you're,
Early of 17, early 17,
And so
February,
there's
March.
there's even still, since that has been up and running and fully functioning, there's still been a massive reduction in the water
The
usage
reduction-
and sewer.
Yes. Yeah, the reduction has stayed pretty consistent over the 3 years.
The final question that I have is, I'm just curious, because I'm not a lawyer, I'm a social worker by trade, and I don't really understand what the benefit, maybe somebody can explain to me why St. Cobain would request a tolling agreement. How would that benefit them versus how it would benefit us?
Well, you're probably going to want to opine on that, but I just know that the first time I heard of it, first time I heard of this as a possibility, I just started thinking, why would they want that? So I put myself in their position, and they would want more information on everything that's going on, which aligns to some of the things we're going to hear tonight. And from the village's perspective, like mentioned before, we also want to hear more about the investigation. And some of the data that we're going to go over tonight states simply that the investigation is going to continue to expand. because they haven't gotten to the edges of the contamination yet. So we're interested in that data as a village to help, that data will guide our decision making. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, as I said before, it's a one-year tolling agreement that's got a 30-day notice out. So we can call it a one-year tolling agreement, but really in the end, what it really means is that for the next year, if we're gonna sue them, we're gonna give them 30 days notice. I suspect on some part, they were motivated to ask that because they were tired of having to deal with me threatening to sue them at any time I felt appropriate. And look, I can understand that they want 30 days notice, and that's fine. You know, people don't litigate by surprise in this day and age. And I've made very clear to them what I believe to be our theories as against them for the causes of action we would bring. I'm not going to characterize how sincere they are in terms of resolving other issues. I'm reasonably convinced that they want to resolve other issues. Do they want to resolve other issues that we've raised with them as fully as we do? And by that I mean, are they prepared to pay the kinds of numbers that we think they eventually should pay? I don't know. Time will tell. We're dealing with two companies here. Each has its own culture. Saint-Gobain has one culture, Honeywell has another. Honeywell, up until about 20 years ago, had a reputation for being as recalcitrant and stubborn in dealing with environmental contamination as any company in the country. But over the last few decades, they have spent literally hundreds of millions of dollars cleaning up one situation after another. They spent $500 million on Onondaga Lake. They spent massive amounts of money for what they call their legacy sites. You know, look, I'm not going to stand here and publicly get into a discourse on how those two companies relate with one another, but I certainly believe that there are reasons why Honeywell may be, let's say, taking a different view of these matters than Saint-Gobain, and I suspect that they have a lot to work out as in between themselves. And I have spoken to their counsel both together and individually in an effort to make sure that everyone's consciousness and awareness is heightened to where I think it has to be if we're eventually going to get this thing resolved without litigation.
Dave, just to do things that might help clarify with the tolling agreement. One, is it cleaner to have it separated where therefore down the road this tolling agreement's not meshed in with them paying us for lost water and sewer revenue? Is it just cleaner to have them separate? And then part two of that is, if we end the tolling agreement, what does that mean for us?
Well,
do we owe the money back? Or is keeping it separate eliminate any possible question of that as well? Just to try to clarify all of that.
Let me be very direct here. They wanted a tolling agreement. I wasn't going to give them a tolling agreement unless they paid some money to the village. Okay, I'm not going to go into everything that we discussed. I understand why they want a tolling agreement, because they've got a lot of things to work out between them and a lot of things to sort out. You know, companies don't just jump up and start writing large checks, you know, sua sponte. And as I've tried to explain, there is certainly some dissonance between the cultures of the two companies. They wouldn't pay money right now unless they got a tolling agreement. I wouldn't give them a tolling agreement unless they paid some money right now. You know, I understand why they want a tolling agreement. I also, given the developments that we've seen over the last number of weeks from ATSDR, some of the data we've seen from the site investigations, and from some of the other things that we know that the companies are looking into in terms of eventually what may have to be the remedial responses here in Hoosick. And some of those are frankly going to be, I think, fairly involved. You know, I can understand why they wanted a delay. And I see no harm in that to us, because on some of these things, the more we know, the better off we are.
Dave, if we didn't have a tolling agreement, how long would it take to sue tomorrow to get to court?
We'd be in litigation on this minimally a couple of years, we would try to rush it along to motion practice on issues, on summary judgment matters, pretty quickly, but, we litigated the Half Moon case on the GE PCB stuff. We were in litigation from 2009 to 2016. Now, in the interest of fair disclosure, I had 2 rounds of spinal surgeries in that period, so some of the delay was on me, okay? I don't think that's gonna happen again, by the way. But litigation it takes years. And, they're gonna have qualified counsel, and there'll be discovery, and there'll be depositions. And I don't hide from litigation. That's how I spent most of my life. But the companies want to avoid it. Let's give them an opportunity. There is no downside to the village. So.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Greg Warren. I live actually in the town, and I came informationally, but I'm also the president of the board of the health center who's in the village. And I came just to learn, but I got some questions in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, the fact that these 2 motions are together, or not together, is like crazy, because what he just said is that if you don't do one, you don't get the other, okay? And you should never put a motion on the floor, discuss one and over another. I've been doing boards for 30 years, so that's just improper procedure. And I don't care to have an explanation for anybody, but it just doesn't work that way, okay? My concern is, because I don't live in the village, is that the village and the town and everybody's operating separately, okay? And we're really not operating with any kind of force against the 2 companies. What he said is that if I have bills at the health center, I'm stuck with the bills. You're gonna get a little money, I'm still stuck with the bills, okay, for running the system at the health center. Forget the bills I have at the school, even though I only get 4 days left in the school for board president, but we have bills there every year to tens of thousands of dollars that run the system, but we're on our own, okay? So for me, it's a bad idea to operate separately. I'm glad you're gonna get your money. You guys have been good to me at the health center, I grant you that. But this separate thing doesn't make sense to me that we're not attacking the problem as a unit, okay? And having more volume of force in the whole thing, all right? And then the whole thing about being so nice about it. I was an HR manager for a very large company. I've been with the school a long time. When it's time for a lawsuit, you do the damn lawsuit, okay? Because you need to push buttons. There's a time when you stop being nice and you say, let's lay down the law and decide who's gonna do what. And that's my only advice. I can't make you do that. I don't even live in I don't live in the village. But if you get your $190,000, that's fine. But you're being way too nice the way you're handling this. Because I work for companies that size. They'll stall you as long as they want to stall you. You really got to get down to the table and say, where we go? Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So at this point, we have our 1 resolution open. Oh, does anyone else? 2 more. All right, we'll take 2 more.
I'll keep this very brief.
No, sorry, name and address.
The issue of Edward Scott, Dr. Edward Scott.
Thanks.
The issue I want to talk about, I wrote to Mr. Allen a while back, but he
Wilder
didn't
Avenue,
get
thank
to
you.
receive a response. We just heard from a lawyer. I get your name.
Dave Engel.
Engel, okay, I've heard your name. The issue I'm raising is that a negotiation relative to these issues involves a lot of training in economics and the administrative sciences, quantitative methods, and so forth. I don't know whether Mr. Engel has any training in that, but most lawyers don't. So I'm asking, why do you ask a lawyer? Stop talking about litigation. If it's litigation, that's one thing. It comes to that. But you need somebody to discuss with St. Gobain and Honeywell, okay, from the point of view of the issues that they have knowledge and training in, which I doubt Mr. Engel does. And I've never had a response.
I can. I'll take that one. Thank you. In terms of his training as a litigator and as a negotiator,
We're not talking about litigation.
talking about the details of PFCs.
No. We're talking
Economics
about,
and hiring an economic
we're
expert.
talking about finance, accounting, strategic management.
Do you want to talk about some of your experts then?
Quantitative methods such as regression analysis and so forth.
Mhm.
That's what we're talking about. Somebody who can talk to these people from a point of view of knowledge and not even talk about litigation because they'll know what to talk about.
Let me address
Try
that.
to keep it brief.
I'll
Okay,
try
we
to
gotta
keep
move
it
on.
brief. To begin with, tonight's proposed agreement is only lost revenue for 3 years. It does not get into the broader issues of economic damages, which I will freely acknowledge remains to be addressed. When I litigated the GE case, for example, I had a team of world-class economists working with me, headed by Dr. Edward Whitelaw, PhD, MIT, Professor Emeritus, University of Oregon, perhaps the leading expert in the world on the issue of damages to municipal infrastructure and specifically water systems. And he testified for me in that case, and he prepared 2 expert reports, and we went through motion practice in federal court, and his analysis stood up. He also happens to be the gentleman who was the expert witness for the city of New York on a much larger case than that one. He has been doing his work for a long time. Ed and I have a very close relationship. I spend hours talking to him every month. I spent 2 hours on the phone with him Saturday morning going over this because Ed, because we have a close relationship, has been helping me out off the books at his end, all right? Now, Ed and his team and others, if I need them, are prepared to work with us from this point forward, all right? Now, that's a matter we're gonna have to figure out how we do that because it's not inexpensive. But I can assure you that we recognize that there's a lot of analysis, and I can tell you further that in looking at damages to municipal infrastructure, the analysis is complicated. The expert reports we've done in some of these cases are detailed to a fare thee well. I don't claim to be an economist. I don't claim to be a toxicologist, but I have spent the last 40 years working with the best experts I could find. I've been very fortunate because the one thing I know is if you're going to do these cases, you find the smartest and best people to work with you. It's always been my approach, it always will be my approach, and I can assure you we'll do nothing less than that.
Thank you. All right, and one more.
Kevin Allard, 5421 State Route 7, Sioux Falls, New York. The first thing I'd like to do is thank the board for your transparency by putting these 2 agreements online. That's not something that, so I'd like to thank you for doing that. I'd also like to encourage you to vote for that money settlement because it's the first time I've heard Saint-Gobain and Honeywell acknowledge that there was an economic impact on the village of Hoosick Falls. And it was a negative impact, as you can imagine. But that, by you voting on that and accepting that, can only transfer to other lawsuits that they also have that, and they have admitted in one case that there was an economic impact. It has to trickle down, sideways, left, right, up, wherever. So I can only encourage you to do that. On the tolling agreement that you have, that only tells me that the scope of contamination in this area is so large that even DEC cannot get a handle on it, and has not gotten a handle on it yet. You know, Mr. Mayor, that I've been to your board meetings and I've asked about Liberty Street, the landfill, and different areas of contamination, and I still don't think after 3 years that they have gotten a handle on the extent of the contamination in this area. I can only believe that a year or less can only strengthen the village's position in a future lawsuit. So I can only encourage you to vote yes on that also. Thank you.
Thank you. And I don't know, DEC may want to clarify that. I think getting a handle is not the expression I would have used, but I know that their investigation is data-driven, starting here and going out as they need to. and they are continuing to go out, just like you said, because they need to. Great, thank you. All right, we have one resolution that we have introduced, and that is the agreement. I do not have a motion on that, correct?
We do have a motion open.
Oh, that's right, we motion, then we went to discussion.
Before we do,
We just briefly discussed the other one, but we didn't actually introduce it.
yes,
Okay.
and just a quick note of, and agreeing with what Kevin had to say, our job here, and it even says it in the first item where we will vote on, or vote against, either way, we have to look out for public interest and the welfare of the village of Hoosick Falls. And right now, and spending the afternoon with our treasurer Denise and seeing where we are at fiscally, to me, not giving up anything in the future, and also to Kevin's point of the companies acknowledging that, yes, in fact, there has been some damage here, that the tolling agreement, although I initially did not understand fully what that meant, I know we hired David Engel because he has our best interest at heart, and I know we are not going to be misled, and he knows a lot more about this than we do. I also feel ultimately our job is to be guardians of the welfare of the village, and with where we are financially, and you know, it would be foolish to not accept this money, but also continue onward. And listen, I would love it if right now we could drop a lawsuit in the lap, but the law doesn't work that fast. Companies don't work that fast. They just don't write a check. So at the end of the day, we have to go through the process, and we have to make sure that if our attorneys decide it's time to actually file litigation, to file a lawsuit, that it is the right time to do it. But I also see this as the first time the companies, and David, correct me if I'm misjudging, the first time the companies seem to be willing to talk to us and try to work out something to help as we continue and DC continues the investigation. Correct?
One word answer?
Yes. Thank you. So that, I just wanted to say that before voting on this one.
All right, any more questions from the board? Then we will roll call vote on the agreement regarding payment for St. Baines and Honeywell.
Yes.
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 And yes for me too. Okay, with that, that resolution has passed. I will now introduce the resolution authorizing the tolling agreement. Now therefore be it resolved, by the Village Board of Trustees of the Village of Hoosick Falls in special session duly convened as follows. 1, the Board of Trustees of the Village of Hoosick Falls has reviewed, understands, and agrees to the terms and conditions of a tolling agreement with St. Gobain Performance Plastics and Honeywell in the form and content attached hereto, and hereby authorizes the village's legal counsel to execute such tolling agreements. I need a motion on that.
Motion.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Second.
Second, Bobby. Any further discussion on that? Okay, roll call vote as well. Yes.
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 Brian and Vanessa, thank you.
Yes.
And yes for me as well. Okay, both have passed. Thank you. I'd now like to turn this next part of the meeting over to DOH and DEC. What's that? Okay. They have agreed and they've worked on two presentations to give us tonight. Fairly hefty updates regarding blood testing from DOH and updates on the alternate water supply study and the pursuit of that, as well as some updates on remediation and some other things. So, who am I turning it over to? Gary.
I don't know where the best spot for it.
The microphone right over there.
Microphone.
Thank you. And I do want to say that DOH will give their updates first. We'll take questions from the board. We'll also take questions from the community. And we'll have the same approach when DEC goes after that. So thank you guys for coming out here and doing this for us.
So we promised when we briefed, my name is Gary Holmes. I'm here with the Department of Health. I'm the Assistant Commissioner for Public Affairs. And I have with me today my colleague from the Center for Environmental Health, Dr. Betsy Lewis-Michael, You've seen both of us at probably a lot of these meetings here. It's nice to see some familiar faces. Thank you to the mayor and to the board for allowing a few minutes at tonight's special meeting here, because we have round 2 blood test. Actually, I'll advance. Let's see here. Here we go. Here we are. We're here tonight to talk about round 2 of blood testing. It's been something we've been talking about with the mayor and some of the trustees about trying to create a second round process that's a little bit more user-friendly. And so tonight we'll be able to speak to some logistics on how that process will work, and the fact of the matter is it'll start immediately, start tomorrow morning. So, but first, I think before we turn the page to round 2, Mary Ellen, excuse me, I'd asked us to maybe see if we can kind of close the book a little bit on round 1. So some of the results that you'll see here, many of you have seen before, and for that, it's going to make a lot more sense coming from Betsy than me. So I will have Betsy take it from here, and I'll advance for you.
So can you hear me okay? Yeah. Oh, it's warm in here, so we're going to go through this quickly, really quickly. The last time people saw group results was quite a while ago. So this is slightly different from what people have seen. This is all of round 1. In Hoosick, in the Hoosick area, people who identified as being from the Hoosick area when they came to get their blood tested, 2,900 people total had their blood tested. 1,640 of those were currently on village water at the time they got their blood tested. And I'm just going to focus on the 50th percentile, the middle level. When we try to summarize for an entire group what their level was, there's various different middle levels you can pick. This 50th percentile, half people were above that level and half the people were below. So for all participants, it was 26.1 micrograms per liter of PFOA in blood, and for people on the village water, it was 48.5 micrograms per liter. For people not currently on village water, that could be people who visited the village and were concerned and had their blood tested, or people living on private wells, some of which had contamination, some of which did not. It could be people who used to live in the village, so that lower number of 8 for people not on village water is just a whole variety of different exposure scenarios. So next slide. One of the things that the blood levels can help us with is if people give us information about their length of residence, we can see if there's a pattern there in the population. So with length of residence, again, this is all adults on the village water. We can see that for people less than 10 years, all the way over to the right, the 31 micrograms per liter in blood, that's for people living in the village less than 10 years. For people 10 to 24 years, that's doubled to 62 micrograms per liter. And then it goes up to 80 for 25 to 40 years of having lived in the village, and is even a bit higher for people more than 40. So this suggests very strongly that exposures for people who lived in the village of Hoosick Falls extended back at least 25 years, if not 40 or more years. So I know people in Petersburg are part of this initiative as well, and I don't know if anyone tonight is from Petersburg, but there were over 500 people from Petersburg area that participated in blood sampling. Overall, their levels for all 500, their middle level was about 5. And for people on the public water supply in Petersburg, it's a very small public water supply, so it's a relatively small number of people, only about 50 people. But their levels were higher. At the middle level was almost 13 micrograms per liter. The levels in blood reflect levels in the water, so those differences between Petersburg and Hoosick Falls are not surprising. So trends over time. I think people here might recall that in February of 2016 is when we started blood sampling. Most people got their blood tested in those 3 months, February, March, April. So if we break down our blood levels and just look at that first part of our 10-year blood sampling effort, 10-month blood sampling effort, the first 3 months, let's just look at the 50th percentile again. So for people in the earlier time period, their middle level was 64 micrograms per liter. And the people who got their blood tested at the close of our round one sampling, their levels were quite a bit lower at 42 micrograms per liter. And if we look down at the various categories here of length of residence, it's between 20 and 40% decline from the first part of the blood testing to the last part. And we're encouraged by that. The real proof of the pudding will be when actual individuals get a second round of blood testing to see how their levels have gone down. But this makes us optimistic. This 20 to 30 to 40% reduction is in line with a 2 to 4 year half-life, where we would expect levels to decline by about half.
So there's a good kind of a spot to pause because, you know, as Betsy had mentioned, a lot of folks that we've interacted with in the community, microphone, I'm very loud.
Sound guy.
Is that better?
Yeah.
So as Betsy had mentioned, a lot of these numbers here people have seen before. In that context, it's an updated context there. I think the key is to see the progress made from those who were tested in the beginning to the end. And that kind of sets the table, I think, for round two here. And so one of the conversations, I alluded to the fact that we had conversations with Mayor Allen and some of the trustees about creating a program that was a little bit more user-friendly, a little bit different than what we did in round one. The good news is we're there. We're ready to launch that program. This summer is a good time to do it for a lot of different reasons. Weather's not a factor. Kids are out of school, kids are home from college. Folks who've maybe moved away from Hoosick Falls or maybe coming back in the summer, visiting friends and family who may still be here, and those individuals be eligible. I should also mention that just as with round one, it's completely voluntary, it's completely free of charge, you're under no obligation to participate. If you participated, the other thing I should say is you don't have to be a participant in round one to participate in round two. If this is if you're new to the community, if you decided you didn't want to do it the first time and you want to this time, by all means you're welcome to. You're under no obligation either way. We can go to probably the next. Oh, and the other thing I want to talk about too is not just how we're going to test, but also what we're going to test for, and I'll turn that back over to Betsy again.
Yeah, for round two, this is just a quick note. The next slide I'm going to explain how round two is going to work, but just a quick note about round one. There were a very few people who had contamination in their private wells that had a slightly different pattern than what was in Hoosick Village water. There were a very few that had more PFOS or equivalent levels of PFOS in their well water. So we wanted to offer those people blood testing for additional chemicals. So we offered that to a few people took us up on that. So for round two, rather than offering some chemicals for some people, something different for others, we're offering the same to everyone. And so it's 6 chemicals. And we don't want to increase people's concern and as far as what we know about Hoosick water. This is just a way to standardize it for everyone who's getting tested in round two.
Now here's how we're going to do it.
So the printing, maybe it's a little small. I don't know how well you can see it, but the idea for round two is it's a little bit more like a clinical model where you go to a lab to get your blood tested. But you don't need to go to a doctor to get a prescription in this case. People are going to have to contact the health department, and we're going to serve as that function. So people can request a blood test, either online or by phone, and they will get what we're calling a test order in the mail. You have to wait to get that test order in the mail. We will be processing them relatively quickly from the time somebody calls in to when they get it. Should be under 2 weeks, hopefully quite a bit less than that. But you have to have that test order to make an appointment with the lab and then take the test order to the lab. More like what you do with a regular physician when you get a lab test. So everyone who participated in round one is being mailed a letter, an information sheet, everything that they need to call and sign up or go online. So those are going in the mail today and tomorrow. What am I?
So the other thing, go ahead.
Yeah. One quick thing is, for people who participated in round one, of course, you can call this number and try to, and sign up immediately, starting tomorrow. But it would be much better if you wait to get that letter of invitation, because it will have your ID number from round one, and if you can provide that ID number when you sign up for round two, it's just an additional, really tight check on exactly matching up your round one and round two results, so.
The other part that I was going to mention here too is where to get a test. So we've been able to work out an arrangement with Southwest Vermont Hospital for testing to occur at the campus there, but also at the Twin Rivers facility here in Hoosick Falls. So you'll be able to go to one of those two places to do that. That was one of the requests that, you know, in speaking with the mayor and the trustees, that we thought was a more convenient way to be able to do that. One of the things Betsy had mentioned was test orders are good for 90 days. So when you receive that test order, note that, you know, the sooner you can make that appointment or receive that test order and make that appointment, the better to get in to see that. And again, the timing there is the letter. You'll either get in the mail beginning tomorrow. Those will go out. The website will be, that web link that you'll see here is active. It'll be active first thing in the morning. And then the phone number will be staffed 8:30 to 4:30 beginning tomorrow morning. You can start making those calls and get that in. We also have with us today, and I'm going to ask the mayor and the trustees to help us out with this. We've got little handouts that we can, you know, send with everybody to. That basically just outlines this graphic here. So share it with people who haven't, you know, weren't able to make it here tonight. And we can also send a PDF to print out and post in multiple spots there as well.
Definitely.
We'll extend the same courtesy to all the communities here that, you know, that were part of round one testing there, to see if we can post it in other public areas as well. But that begins tomorrow, and, you know, as soon as folks start making appointments there, we'll work on this end, expedite it, and make sure that those results can get back to people in a timely manner.
So the quick summary is they have to request the test from you. They can do it over the phone or online.
That's right.
And they get their ID numbers from the letters that are out in the mail today or tomorrow. And they can either get the testing over at Twin Rivers, even if they're not a patient at Twin Rivers, they can still do it. And they can also go to Southwestern Vermont Hospital.
You got it.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions pertaining to blood testing or their presentation? Mary, why don't you go first?
I have concerns. We have children that are out of the state, and I'm thinking your letters going out. Well, my daughter's up in Vermont, but believe it or not, it takes a week to get mail up there. And my concern is, like, her getting time off come down. Like, I know she's due here the week of July 10th, she's coming down. Would she be able to get the blood test that soon?
We can, well, I think you can make appointments for your loved ones, correct, Betsy?
Right, when you call the 800 number or when you do it online, you can sign up for.
You guys have questions? If you have questions, I forgot that.
All right, well, I need their ID number, or do they
You
have?
don't have to have it, it's just helpful if you have it. Then you really know for sure who.
Yeah, I'll see, I'm
Say they
sure.
change address or change.
Yeah.
But I think that's a good example in terms of what we thought the summer was a good opportunity to do it, because folks will be coming back to see, you know, loved ones who are still here, and it provides an opportunity to make that appointment at your own discretion.
Yeah, also if you there's additional information when you get your letter, which hopefully you'll get in 3 or 4 days. There's a number you can call and explain how your daughter's needs to be expedited, and we can work on it.
Yeah, I know she ran into a lot of problems really with the first one. That
There's
appointments and
Don't
everything else.
hesitate to call, not the 800 number, the number first. Call for questions, experts, and I can share with you after.
Okay.
Call anybody who has an issue where they need something special. Don't hesitate to call the health department and get some help. Don't just rely on the 800 number that's set up for the appointments.
Just a quick question, when we get the round two analysis sent to us, will we also have on that same sheet of paper round one, so we can look at the comparative?
Yeah, I think that's the plan, right?
Okay.
I'm sorry, the board also may have questions, so board, do you guys have any questions as well you wanted to ask?
I just want to.
I'm going out of order,
Yeah.
but I want to make sure everyone gets.
2 clarifying things, to go back to results. When you guys, I just want to clarify because I know people do often misunderstand. Geometric mean is not an average. It's the middle point where 50% of the levels are below, 50% are above, correct?
That's the 50%.
50%, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm clarifying, I'm screwing it up.
Right.
But just to clarify, it's not the average, it's that
Correct. It's
middle.
not an average.
Correct.
It's a form of an average.
Yes, it's just a different kind. Just I want to be clear on that, that's not the average, it's
Right.
the middle.
Right.
Also too, to clarify with this time around making the appointments, it's a lot more streamlined, you're actually doing it in a medical setting, so that actually probably make the process smoother, more people, if they didn't before, it'll be more manageable for schedules. So this could increase the number perhaps of people who are able to be tested.
Sure, I think that this setting, to your point, Ryan, is that it's more the more traditional lab, blood draw setting, a confidential medical environment, which was different than how it was done the first time, and done again at your discretion. It'll be up to the participant to get that lab order and make that appointment.
All right, Craig, you had a question?
Just real quick on the data that you showed, that's a real high-level summary on the website that you showed. There's a lot more of the supporting information that's on there, correct?
Definitely.
Okay. Any other board questions? All right, residents. Let's go 1, 2, 3, 4. 1.
So you said that the round 1 and round 2 results will be on the same page, that for each individual, my personal round 1 results will be next to my personal round 2 results?
Right. We'll provide some perspective on the personnel change.
Could you guys just restate that through the mic? 'Cause I don't know if everyone heard that over here. That's a great question.
If we can match you correctly, see, that's why it's really helpful to wait and get your ID number, then we can be certain who you were in round 1, and so we can provide that to you when you get your round 2 results, so you can have both right there in the same, same page, same packet, yeah.
Please.
I'm continually amazed by the number of people I ask, particularly my family and friends, and particularly millennials, that do not get tested and have them. So I wonder if you compare the people who gotten tested with the demographics of the community, so you can do some projections, if there's an underrepresented population there that you haven't reached.
We actually haven't done that. I think we've got a pretty good representation probably of the younger and the older, but just from observing who came, but the middle might be and the younger, families were well represented, but so right.
Yeah, and I think that ties into the fact that even if you weren't tested around 1, you can be tested around 2, and I think a lot of people, especially people who chose not to in round 1, are starting to see the value in doing it because it helps get more data to the village, which will help everything else that's going on. Yeah, 3?
So my question actually ties into the previous question. Aside from sending info via mail to the participants in round 1, do you plan any other form of outreach? Because announcing it here at a meeting that's not too well visited will not reach elderly people, will not reach people who are currently at work, who couldn't make time for this. Is there anything else you have planned?
Yeah, well, we're certainly open to word of mouth is terrific. We've got a lot of our colleagues in the media here helps as well. We're definitely going to ask for some help with the trustees and the mayor to spread that as well. The flyers that we have that we can ideally hopefully distribute around town, posting information on on the website as well. But we really, I think, can use some help from the community in terms of making sure that we're reaching those who weren't able to attend tonight or maybe aren't following the issue closely. Certainly, please.
Flyers at the grocery store, at Rite Aid, and at the village office, and also at the post office would probably reach about 80% of people at this
Great.
time.
We brought a lot with us today, and we hope to leave empty-handed.
Thank you. Yes.
I have not been to a lot of your meetings, but I have been on top of what has been going on in the village with the PFOA. I have just a statement to make, basically as a person who lives in this village and has been moved here 30 years ago. When I moved here, there was a sign in this town that said this was the purest water ever, anywhere. There are people in this town that have been born here, that are still alive here, that do not have anything that is wrong with them here. And I think I am kind of shocked at the way that this has come about. I know that Hoosick Falls is a hurting town, We have lost major businesses, which has caused major hardships in this town. And I believe that St. Gobain and Honeywell, because they are up and running, and I do believe that the ball was dropped long before now, long before this happened. And I do believe that that began with state and county for the testings. No one had a molecule of an idea of what those values were. No one. No one had the idea of what the levels were. You have no proof that you had it. The Department of Health told us that the water was safe to drink after it came out. And I find that this whole thing is basically a money grabber for this town. I find it wrong.
I forgot to ask for the record because people were supposed to speak. Could you have your name and address for the record?
My name is Susan R. Whalen. I live at North Hoosick, P.O. Box 91. And I have been a true loyal member. I worked in this building for 18 years and drank your tap water. And I am just saying, I cannot be more abhorred at the fact that we would jump on two companies that walked in here after so many years. There is a history, there is a museum of the history of this town up on the other street on Main Street. You will be able to find out what started this town, what companies were here, who had what.
Ma'am, respectfully, do you have a question regarding the blood testing or the...
The blood testing I did.
Okay.
What I am concerned with is the whole entity of this village and this town. And the fact that they are looking beyond what is right and what is just. And they're looking at two companies that are making money in this town that could just as easily walk out of this town and leave anyone that has a job.
Well, ma'am, respectfully, this is not the forum for that, but if you want, I can certainly sit down and talk to you about some of the things that we have found. I can even go back into the 90s and 2000s.
You've got to go back farther than that.
And with EPA and their lack of making a guidance system for the rest of the states of the country
I'm asking you, if they didn't have a guidance system, how can you turn around and claim that these companies are the only ones responsible for this?
Easily, because we can track all of the things that were used. We can track how it's worked. We have studies all across the nation that explain how this works, and I would be very glad to sit down with you and go over all this, but this is not the forum for that. We have a presentation from DOH and DEC here.
The Department of Health is giving theirs. Can you tell me?
Ma'am, do you have a question about the blood testing?
Yes, I am. Can you tell me that when we got our blood tested, after you told us that the water was safe, are you telling us that when you told us the water was safe, it was safe?
Ma'am, I'm not even sure what you're referring to when they said it was safe.
They sent a pamphlet out telling us after that water was safe, after the whole thing with St. Gobain. We did get a pamphlet from the Department of Health saying that the water was safe.
The health department, when we find contamination in water, we take actions to reduce exposures. And the whole history of how that developed and progressed here in Hoosick Falls is kind of complicated and a long one, but we don't actually even use the word safe, because almost all water has some issues with it. So, but I don't want to go into, I don't think this is the right forum.
Ma'am, we are going to move on. We are at your disposal. The Department of Health has said they're at your disposal. I am at your disposal. I've been at your disposal. This is not the forum for that discussion because we have a lot of other things we have to go over.
I just think that some
we understand
should be out.
And I will be glad to share those with you. Are there any other questions for the Department of Health? All right, thank you guys for this present. Oh, sorry.
Came in the door. I am wondering if the air has also been tested.
That's gonna come from DEC, and we'll be getting to that shortly. All right, thank you. All right, thank you guys very much. We'll be in touch about getting information out on Facebook, in the local newspapers. And I like the idea of getting pamphlets at the post office as well, because that's a very well-visited place.
We have 300 that we'll leave with here tonight.
Perfect.
We have a PDF I can send you to print, and we're happy to help
All right.
the town if need be.
Thank you. Thank you. Members of DEC, who will be introducing us, or who's starting? Thank you, Sean.
Good, how are you? All right, thank you, Mayor and DOH. So I've got two of my colleagues here, Sue Edwards and Ian Bilby, who are two of our project leads on the Hoosick Falls cleanup that's underway. We're obviously very eager to give you all an update. We've been working with the mayor regularly to provide updates to him on a monthly basis for his village board meetings, and we've been actively working to plan additional community engagement events coming forward, and you'll hear a little bit more about that tonight. But we know that you really are eager to hear some updates on where things are moving with the alternate water supply study, and also just with regard to all the cleanup actions that are underway at the various sites within the town. So my colleagues here will be doing just that, and we'll kick it off with Sue here in a moment. But just to reiterate some of the history of sort of what brought us here today and where we're going, it's important to remember that prior to 2016, New York State didn't have the authority to regulate these chemicals, and we were the first state to actually get that authority by classifying PFOA and PFOS as hazardous substances here in the state. That unlocked our Superfund authorities, and from there, that's what allowed us to step in and make sure a water treatment system was provided on the village supply and also to impacted area homes. And allowed us to make sure that first and foremost the clean water was being provided as we worked to hold the companies that were responsible for this accountable. And that's what we did by locking them into consent orders, which really started the process of what we're here to talk about tonight, which is making sure that they're investigating the potential sources of contamination and developing cleanup plans and moving forward with an alternate water supply study. It also helped set the stage for the companies in the village to negotiate on some of the agreements that we talked about tonight. So, you'll hear us say this, but again, this is a process. It's one that we have experts that you'll hear from tonight that are very involved in this. And, our job is not done until the cleanup is complete, and we're not going until the job is done. So tonight we're going to give you an update of where we are. We obviously look forward to continuing the dialogue with you, but I'll turn it over to Sue now to talk a little bit more about where we are with the alternate water supply study.
Thank you, Sean. So you want to be able to see the screen, sorry?
Sue, do you want to stand over here?
You know what? I can just do this. So this municipal water supply study, that is something that was, a call had come out that, is there another water supply that the village could be utilizing instead of the current contaminated well field that exists? And the governor was on board with that. He directed the DEC to start some preliminary assessments to see if there was possible other options. And we also, in our consent order with Honeywell and Saint-Gobain, demanded that they do a study with our oversight and with our input and with the community's input. So what we're looking for is a municipal water supply that is viable, that has enough capacity, that is reliable, it's sustainable throughout the future, and of course, that's protective of human health. That is just a standard requirement, a criteria that if it's not protective of public health, then it won't be considered. So the options that are really available are, where do we get our water now? Where do other people get their water? And from a groundwater source, which is what the village does now, and many communities across the state use groundwater for drinking water. A new surface water source. A lot of people get their water from rivers and from reservoirs, and certainly New York City has many, many reservoirs, so that's a potential option. Other options are to contract with another municipal water supply. You know, are there existing water supplies around that would be willing to sell the water to the village and also might have the capacity to do so? Another option is to continue to use the existing well field, but to provide for a mitigation of that well field and close and stop the continued migration of contamination to the well field, so ultimately it would get cleaned up, or some combination of the above. So currently, what the village uses is about 500,000 gallons per day, and that's kind of the general average use. It can go up to almost 800,000 gallons per day, but at the treatment plant that is currently in use that has the granulated activated carbon was designed to be able to sustain at least 1 million gallons per day. And what we're telling the companies to do is identify what the future use might be in the community, so that we're not just finding a water source that is good for today, but wouldn't be good 10 or 15 years from now because of new needs or new development in the community. So again, back to one of the options is a new groundwater source. And is it viable? Does it have the volume that is really necessary to sustain the village? And finding a place that isn't impacted by potential contamination. Now I want to say, this is not an easy job. This is a complicated area. The geology is complicated. You're in a rural area, and options, it's not just an easy, oh, we'll just go down the road and find a water source. So this takes time, it takes energy, it takes a lot of effort and technical expertise to identify something that will really work for you in the long term. So these are the areas that we've been looking. Here's the village, is right here, and we've looked in various aquifers to see if any of these would be viable. Many of them are don't seem to have come to be viable because of various geologic formations. They're just not have the capacity. And what the DEC found in their preliminary studies was that an area down here was probably the most promising for a groundwater source. And this is a closer look at the area that was what we looked at. It's south of Hoosick Falls, and one location that we do think is quite promising is this location 4, which is down along Route 22 south of the village. If this groundwater source that's near the village were to come to fruition, it potentially would be a 2.5 to 3 mile transmission line, and we would have construction of wells, and that groundwater source would still need treatment because most groundwater sources, all drinking water sources usually need treatment of some sort. So we would use the existing treatment plant. So on to the potential surface water sources. In looking around this area, there's really only a few surface water sources that really can give the capacity that is necessary. And we looked at the Walloomsac, looked at the Hoosick River, and we've also looked at the Tomhannock Reservoir. The Walloomsac is rather shallow, not particularly a good source. It also has some PFCs in it. The Hoosick River is similar in that it's dirty and silty, and there's also PFCs present. The most viable option at this point in time is the Tom Hannock, and recent information that we had obtained from the city of Troy that was required by their recently issued permit from the DEC was that they were to look at the available capacity. It looks like the reservoir does have adequate capacity if the village were to hook into that reservoir. And also DOH recently went out and sampled the reservoir and indicated that there are no PFCs present in the reservoir. All good news. In addition, we are doing some assessments to look at other areas such as Broadbrook. There was information that the mayor had brought to us that suggested there might be a place in Vermont that North Adams used to use, and this Broadbrook area will be part of that study when it comes out in the future.
Can I just mention something about that?
Sure.
The investigation in Bennington came from the fact that people came to us and said, we want them to look at Bennington, and they looked at Bennington. The investigation in North Adams came because it ended up being Brian, but basically a citizen discovered that there was a brook coming out of North Adams in Vermont that used to be used for drinking water. So the question became, could that be a viable option? The other question that came out of North Adams was, would they have enough capacity in their reservoir? But the point that I wanted to make is that happened because someone did some research, looked it up, and brought it to the village, and we brought it to DEC. And it's that kind of conversation that has been so helpful in all of the processes, not just in this, but in terms of looking at the contamination overall in the investigation. That's been really, really helpful. So I just wanted to continue to thank the people, Brian for this one, and everyone who's been involved in giving information. It's been a huge help, and it's really helped to focus how this stuff is progressing.
Yes, and he makes a good point, is that the DEC is certainly open. If there are people here that have some suggestions, please let us know. And we'll take that into account and see if there's anything that we should do more to look at those areas. So on to the existing municipal water supplies. There's not a lot nearby, but these are the areas that we did look, is in Troy, Scotticoke, which is near the Tom Hannock, Petersburg, which is, as most people know, it's quite small, Pownell, Williamstown, many areas around the village. And we've looked, there's been a number that have been looked at. The only one that really seems to have any potential viability at this point in time, and further assessment is being done, is the city of Troy. And that would mean that taking a water line directly from the city after their treatment, and it would go directly to the village with some potentially disinfection at the end. One of the other options that we can't discount is that you already have an existing well field. And it's actually working. It's providing everyone with clean drinking water. This system can be upgraded relatively easily to at least 1.15 million gallons per day. And in conjunction with this would be a remedial measure, which is a cleanup measure to stop the contamination that's coming from the McCaffrey Street site and flowing towards the well field. And once you stop that contamination from flowing, the well field should ultimately clean up. But in the meantime, there would still be continued treatment, and the water would still be given to the village in a state that is potable. And then finally, as a combined source, is, for instance, if there's a municipal water supply that just can't give the capacity that's necessary, but could be combined with another source, such as a groundwater source, then that might be a combined option that we have told the companies they must look at. So every one of these types of options, we expect that there will be at least one option that would be fully evaluated in the final water supply study, and that, and all that option would be fully vetted with all the costs and the design criteria, and that we can then present to the public. So, like I said earlier, this isn't an easy thing. We have a lot of work to do on the groundwater option. There's still significant geophysical monitoring, well placement, an actual well that would have to do a pump test. This is going to take some time. We also need to finalize the safe yield analysis for the Tom Hannock, which should be probably within the month. We should get a final report on that. And then have them evaluate the Broadbrook area, and also design of the remedial measure. They have already done all the conceptual work that's necessary for that remedial measure on site, and they can move into the design right now. And then finally is we need to have a determination of what the expected use of the village would be into the future, so that we can anticipate what the capacity is that's necessary. So after we've completed the field work and while this is all ongoing, of course, is all the investigations at the different sites, especially in McCaffrey Street. And we're going to incorporate any new data that might affect these options into this report. And then we will have a report we expect in 2019. And then issue a final plan, but of course with public input. We expect and hope that people will be here to provide us with public input as to what they think the best option should be. Excuse me.
Hey, Sue.
Getting dried out here.
Before we go into the investigations, can we stop and pause and ask questions and digest this? Is that all right?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, no option will be selected without the community being involved.
Sure.
Excuse me.
Thanks, Sue. So yeah, does anyone have any questions on what Sue?
Start with the board, because that was the
Sure.
agenda I had here. Craig?
You mentioned one of the criteria being the water source would have to be protective of human health.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain to me what protective of human health actually means in a practical manner?
Sure. I mean, and DOH can talk about the water supply requirements that any water supply would have to make for a suite of contaminants that have to be looked at, outside of the perfluorinated compounds. There's just baseline levels that have to be met to make sure that it's a viable source. So when you look at things like the Hoosick River, it being a Class B water body, that's not suitable for drinking water. So we have to look at, the different type of classifications of, say, a surface water source, or what, for a groundwater source, what the current level of various things from iron, manganese, you name it. There has to be rigorous testing and reviews done. That's what, DEC did with the well 4 area that Sue was talking about to get a jump start on the groundwater source. Not just did we look at the capacity, we looked at what was in there to make sure that it was going to be viable from that standpoint.
So is PFOA one of the compounds that would be looked at
Yes.
when you consider protective of human health?
Of course.
And what level would you consider protective of human health?
Well, right now we're, obviously working with DOH to set MCLs in the state for that in particular. In the meantime, we've got the health advisory level from EPA, but ideally we're looking for a source that's purely free of PFOA to tap into, and that's where.
So 70 is the actual technical answer right now, though, right? That's the standard.
Yeah, at present, we work on the MCL for the state to
so
set
that
a
we could end
different
up
level.
with a source greater than non-detect.
We would have to, as a committee, approve that.
This study could lead to a source that's greater than non-detect of PFOA.
Yeah, but we're going to present all the data and let the community tell us what option you think is right. And if there is a potential source that has, some levels of perfluorinated compounds, you're going to see all that and you're going to give us your feedback before we move forward on anything.
Do you have studies on that test well south of Hoosick? Do you know the capacity?
For the Area 4 location?
Right.
Yeah. The capacity test that we did found initially that it can meet half of the village's supply. What we're requiring the companies to do, as Sue talked about, is to go in and do additional evaluations of the aquifer in that area to see if we can draw the full supply and greater from that area. So that's what we're requiring the companies to do now before we do anything else with groundwater sources.
Bobby? No, Brian?
Us two, going back to, and again, to speak with the mayor, the process of finding Broadbrook and also North Adams haven't been looked at before as municipal supply. If people have other ideas on areas to look or suggest, one, who would be the person to get them to?
Yep, Sue Edwards would be your person.
My information will be at the end of the slide.
And we'll be around here tonight too, so if anyone has any ideas that we should be looking at now, feel free to let us know tonight.
And I just want to clarify too on the note of that one that, well, sometimes, and this is my view, that Tom Hannock may look great, but I don't want to trade one set of problems for another, so we shouldn't decide on it has to be this after seeing preliminary data. I just want to add that caution that we need to make sure we choose the right source forever, not just for right now.
Exactly, and again, Brian, I mean, like what we've tried to say, we're requiring the companies to do this full analysis. We're giving you the update of where we are tonight. We're not at the phase right now for you to give us your exact opinions on what you're seeing tonight, because we want to present the full suite of options when they're finished with their study, and then engage in a dialogue, and you know, the community will pick, and we'll move forward and work with the companies to get them to develop it.
Thank you.
Just one more question on
Sure.
Tom Hannock. So initially, the capacity studies indicated there might not be excess capacity.
Correct.
And then what I heard tonight was the most recent study indicates that there might be excess capacity.
Yeah.
So my question is, who vets Troy's capacity study?
So, pursuant to any municipal water supply in the state, they have to meet certain threshold requirements for the source that they tap into, how much they're withdrawing from that source to make sure it's sustainable. So Sue talked about the safe yield analysis. What we found is Troy's supply was growing, they were hooking up additional communities, they were withdrawing what seemed to be more than their permit required. So we required them to do a more deeper look into that safe yield analysis on the Tomahawk to determine how much of a supply was there. Was Troy overdrawing? Were there going to be other changes that were going to be needed? So what they found is the actual safe yield from the Tomahawk Reservoir is greater than what Troy is currently drawing from. So that makes it a viable source to potentially consider, and that's why we have the capacity that's there.
And when you say they, is that they Troy Water District, or is that they the state? Who determined that there was excess capacity?
Yeah, that was Troy through the permit requirements that the state of New York, required them to undertake this analysis.
And the state of New York reviews that report, thoroughly vets that report, and then either agrees, I think they're in the point where they've said, no, there's some issues, a couple things that you need to correct on this report, and then you can submit the report back in. But we fully expect that what was in the preliminary report will be what the findings are in the final report.
Is there sampling from the tap or from the water itself?
Reservoir?
Reservoir.
DOH can discuss that because they took the sampling of, I believe it was from the raw water in the Tomahawk Reservoir.
I just want to add another too, that in considering alternate sources, is DEC also looking at the potential to help Petersburg, Berlin, and Pommel, even though it's another state, depending on what direction we come from, we may be able to help multiple communities and not just here. Is that?
Well, our focus, and Sue can correct me if I'm wrong, but our focus is obviously Hoosick Falls. That's who we have the companies under order for the cleanup and for doing this evaluation. If in the course of finding an alternate water source or other potential, opportunities to work with other responsible parties, we'll pursue that. But right now, our focus is figuring out what the village needs and finding a source that could be considered by the community.
All right. Last time we started on this side, so we'll start on this side. Who has any questions? Go for it.
Hi, I have two questions. The first one, when can we expect the final study to come out?
Well, as Sue outlined here, there are a number of steps that the companies still have to do to more fully evaluate these sources. We're working to expedite their analysis and evaluation of that based on the amount of groundwork or field work that has to happen to more fully develop and look at these groundwater sources, to study the Broadbrook area and a number of the other options we're looking at. That's going to take a period of time. What our goal is to give you an update of the fall, get through the summer to see how much work they've accomplished, and that's going to give us a better sense of the timeline moving forward and when we can expect to have a draft report out to get your feedback. So we'll be back here soon with more updates.
Thank you. And my second question, and actually more importantly, you focus, I always see a groundwater. 2.5 years ago, I sat in a meeting where the EPA stressed that the focus should be on surface water because of the extent of, and the amount of the pollution. Why are we even entertaining using the current water fields?
Well, because through the investigation, I think we're getting a solid understanding of groundwater flow in the area and exactly how groundwater is moving. And what we've tried to find is an area where is not likely to become contaminated based on groundwater flow in the area. And that's why we sort of honed in on this, both from the geologic standpoint of the characteristics in the ground and what the source is. But again, our goal here was to present a menu and suite of options for everyone to consider, put all the details on the table and engage you in a conversation. So if when you look at what comes back on the groundwater source and the community doesn't like it, we won't pursue that. But what we want to do is get the data to make an informed decision.
And I'll just speak to that, and this is me personally, and this is not the board. It's going to be a tough sell for me to choose a groundwater source that's near an investigation that we haven't gotten the edges of yet.
Thank you.
So, just understood. Yes, and then.
So just more, I think, a statement is, I know that Trustee Bushner was making reference to kind of future capacity, future clean water, no matter what the source is, and I think that it's also important to understand from the DEC's point of view how we can't predict the future, right? We have a lot of manufacturing, we have these factories that are still up and running today with all kinds of chemicals that they're using. So what is the DEC's take on being proactive at trying to prevent whatever water source is picked from being contaminated by emerging contaminants or existing contaminants? I would hate to see, you know, something be picked and then, yeah, we have a lot of development, we have a lot of industry happen, and then that ends up being a problem.
How to answer that. So, I mean, every day we've got our experts in the remediation division, our division of water, that are looking at water bodies across the state and assessing, you know, what the current threats are. They're doing source water protection assessments, so looking at the aquifers that support a lot of these communities. What are the potential development threats or other threats that could be leading to contamination in the future? I think here, you know, obviously what we're going to do is take as much data as we can and present that all to you. To the extent that we can show trends over time, we can, you know, put that in the report as well. But, I mean, we're going to continue to monitor any source into the future in general. So if there are any issues that pop up, you know, we're going to work with the community to address them. And, you know, with regard to, you know, industry and emerging contaminants, I mean, we're on the front lines of figuring that out here in the state, and we're committed to making sure that communities' water systems are protected. And that's why we've got Clean Water Infrastructure Act, and we've got a lot of authorities that, you know, the governor's provided us, and we're continuing to strengthen our hand to make sure that we're adequately protecting water resources in the state.
I guess my only other comment or question is you, Susan, you had mentioned that in looking at groundwater or the contamination from the Haverty Street, being able to stop that and clean that up as a potential option, which is anyone's first choice, obviously. Would it be beneficial to do that regardless?
Yeah.
Yeah, as Ian will probably tell you too, I mean, that's exactly what we're looking at the companies to do in general.
Yeah, it's just that they've done this, they're doing this now because of the known issue with the well field. There is a desire to at least minimize the amount of material that's going into the well field now. So we're trying to move ahead with the companies, get that design in place, get that remedial option or action in place that cuts off the contamination going to the well field and quickly reduces the amount of material that's getting to the well field. So, but yes, it would be something they would probably need to do anyway.
Yes.
You say Troy. Troy has had their problems with their water system, so if you're going to try to feed off Troy, and they have water shortages, and they have an infrastructure underneath Troy that has major issues, they have pipes breaking here and there, is that going to create a problem for people here?
May I speak
Well,
to that?
I mean, I'll just say, Brian, I mean, that's why we had the city of Troy, irrespective of this analysis, do that safe yield analysis to determine what their water use rates were, and if they had enough supplying capacity from their current reservoir to be able to tap into it. But that's
I'm only
something
asking because
Can I
they are.
speak to that? Because what I think I'm hearing, I agree with you, and one of my concerns with Troy is that Troy has, for many years, mismanaged their infrastructure. They've mismanaged other municipalities that are getting water from them. There's been mains breaking, cutting off other communities where they're left if they don't have a backup. So for the political machine that runs Troy and a lot of the whiplash you can get from Troy, I don't want us 20 years down the road to maybe have really clean water, but be dealing with Troy. So that's one of the things I brought up, is that I'm not gonna make my mind fully, but it's one of those big concerns I have. I just wanted to speak to that, I agree with you.
I just wanted to know that if they ran out or we were dry, or who's gonna fill it?
Right, for line breaks or there's an issue,
Right.
right, that's an issue,
And
a concern I
the
have.
safe yield test that goes in for the Tomahanic, that actually looks at not just normal usage, but like worst case scenario in a season of some kind of drought.
That's correct.
So that's how that test works.
Well, I'm just wondering, would that make our water source here drought?
You would have to have a contract with the city of Troy. And so each of these existing municipalities that might have capacity to give to the village of Troy, that's at the behest of that community.
And that would be at the cost of this town?
Well, you would have to contract with the municipalities to get the water.
But the question comes, of course, who pays for that? And that's, of course, the
Well,
question.
that's what I'm asking.
Yeah,
Who pays for that?
That's a different question.
That's a scenario that would have to be worked out later, but I can tell you, I'm not very excited about the possibility.
So
of
again, and
paying
you
for
know,
more.
there's
I
two
understand
different,
what
with
you're
the city of
saying. We
Troy,
all-
you've got a connection to their existing water infrastructure network. That was the intermunicipal connection.
Okay.
Then we're also evaluating just creating your own connection to the Tomahanic Reservoir, where you
Okay.
have a direct intake from that fed Hoosick Falls. So those are the different options we're looking at, giving you the pros and cons of that, and we're gonna present that suite of options for you to consider and give us feedback on.
Any other questions? Michael? Okay. Actually, here, why don't you go first, and then we'll do follow-up.
Two questions. One, in your criteria, you did not list cost, although I think you mentioned cost once. So I'd like to know how much of that factors into any of the criteria.
And that's why we wanted to present it without any of those cost figures right now, because.
Well, it was mentioned once, though.
Yeah.
The
Well,
question is that a criteria?
Yes, it's one of the criteria that the companies are required to.
It will be at the end.
Yeah.
The second question is the county health department at all involved in your analysis? And if so, because one of the properties, out there, people say south, is a county legislator's property. So I want to make sure that's firewalled off from anything you're doing, that there's no politics behind that analysis.
The county health department, the person that's involved in water supplies, is aware of the options, but he is not intimately involved in this study.
No, this is really, our effort as the overseeing regulator of the companies responsible to produce a study. We're overseeing all aspects of it. To the extent that we have to work with the county or the city of Troy to obtain data, that's really on the companies to do, but that's the extent of their engagement right now.
Yes.
Thank you.
And then we'll come
So
back.
just, not a question, just a comment on the concerns regarding entering in dealings with the city of Troy. That is an administrative problem, not an environmental problem, and administrative problems can be taken care of upon entering or prior to entering in a contract with the city of Troy, and those problems can be anticipated and put into contract.
Yeah, and we don't have any of our team of lawyers here tonight, but they'd be happy to talk to you about that process.
Talk to Rensselaer about that.
Yes.
Well, no, but it
try
can be
to
addressed,
Rensselaer
it's
with
not an
that.
environmental
Yep.
problem.
I was going to ask, as money is a discussion here tonight, has St. Gobain and Honeywell, what amount of contribution have they given this town till now?
You talking about in terms of the investigation or in?
I'm talking about in terms of water, providing water, making sure people had what they needed. I'm just asking. Does anybody have that number?
Well, I mean, New York has spent, and we've estimated on our response so far, both from the investigations that we've done, from the filtration supplies, on private residents, about $25 million, which we intend to go after the companies to reimburse the state. That's how the
But St.
Superfund
Gobain
process
has
works.
put money into this already, has it not?
Correct. I mean, some of the investigation work that they're doing, that's coming at their dime now, since we have a consent order with them
And they
requiring them to do
also
that.
did put money in for the people of this town to have water.
Correct. Well, we put the money in first, and then they're going to pay us for that.
I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew that they were there for you.
I think we're very aware.
Well, okay,
what they had to do
we're
and
getting
what
it,
to avoid
we're getting a bit off topic
No,
again.
No,
Again, we're,
just that they were there.
and we can discuss when they got there and when they didn't get there another time, I understand that. Michael?
Sure.
Thank you, guys. I wanted to just come up here and say thank you, Rob, the board, the DEC, the Department of Health, for everything that you guys have been doing for us and continue to do. I think it's pretty important to note, you know, with the study that came out last week, Rob going to Washington, that I've had a pretty unique position in all this, where I've gotten to be able to talk to other communities and be involved in other states. And I think that, you know, I'm glad we're going slow, right? We were in a position a year ago almost that we were going to sign off for the $1 million and waive away all our rights at that point in time. Now you've almost recouped already $500,000 on that, and we have no rights. So you're really setting precedent, I think, for the rest of the country to look at, you know, and what we see more and more. You know, I know that you don't quite like the science of it, and the proof of the illness is maybe hard to see. But when you're looking at an 854-page study, and you see scientists after scientists review this, and you see all these people up here working so hard on a day-to-day basis for us, it's a real threat. You know, I think it's always been confusing. When you look at the water, you can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't taste it, so you don't know if it's real. You know, the blood test, I hope, when they come out the second time around, is that people are going to see a reduction by half or more. And it'll show the hard work that everybody's been doing, continues to do on a day-to-day basis. And I think that also, I think it's important to note that St. Gobain and Honeywell, you know, they have stepped up. They've done a good job. And I think the state this week also laid the framework for them to go after their suppliers that gave them the chemicals that polluted the air. So they're going to have an option now to recoup for their losses, as well as, you know, for us here. So it's a trickle-down effect. And I think that the more science that we see on a day-to-day basis, and the work that we're seeing and the progress that we're seeing, we're you know, so far ahead of these other states, and I think it's such a good thing to see. You know, the board, the people, the passion, the people wanting to have pride in their community like we do here. And, you know, I just want to thank you guys for everything that you do.
Any other questions before we go on to the next part of the presentation? All right, great. Why don't you move on?
Before we do, I did get a Twitter question apparently from Miss Liz Moran here too about private wells in the area, and I think Sue touched on that a little bit. With the additional capacity analysis that's underway, we're determining, you know, how we're going to hook up private wells, or what the potential is for the need to hook up private wells in the area. So that's going to be factored into the additional capacity that's needed as we look to the sources that are under consideration.
All right, let's move on.
So up next is Ian to go through and give us updates on the various sites that are under investigation.
Good evening, everyone. So I'm actually relatively new to the emerging contaminant field, new hire by Sue. I'm excited to dive into the challenges that the emerging contaminants face. I've been working, trying to get up to speed on all the investigations that have been going on out here. I've had some sites in Troy and some sites downstate, but I just wanted to give you a little background about where I'm coming from. If there are some questions about the specific investigations that are going through, it's only because I haven't made it through all the emails and reports and stuff and the data that are coming in. But I'm going to try and get you up to speed on 4 of the investigations that are going on right now. They include the Hoosick Falls landfill, St. Gobain McCaffrey Street, Liberty Street, and Oak Materials on John Street. There we go. Here's a figure that shows where all those facilities or disposal sites are. Landfill. Here's a couple other P sites, we call them. We haven't quite made it to the investigation phase on some of these facilities. Liberty Street. There's John Street there, and McCaffrey. So we'll start out with the landfill. Here's just a simple diagram. It's got some of our monitoring points on it. It's got the north is, of course, going up. So we began a site characterization back in 2017. We put some monitoring wells in. We've been sampling the monitoring wells. We've sampled the wells for groundwater. We've sampled a bunch of the other media, including soil, surface water, in a bunch of different periods through 2017 and 2018. So we have found some pretty high levels of PFOA in monitoring wells, which means it's in the groundwater. Tends to be highest around the north point of the landfill. We have found the PFOA in surface water in some of the drainage swales or the ditches around the disposal area. We expect a final site characterization, which is the SC final report in December of 2018 this year. Move down to McCaffrey Street. So at McCaffrey Street, we're currently involved in a remedial investigation, assuming everyone is aware of that. The RI, the intent of the RI is to determine the nature and the extent of the contamination, which means by nature what type of contaminants are there, not just PFCs, or PFOA in this case, but maybe some other contaminants that might be around. And we need to determine the extent. So soil, groundwater, air, sediment, all the different media are taken into consideration. We have received a data summary report, which is just basically a data dump. Here's what we've found so far. We got that just earlier this month, and work has expanded to off-site areas around the facility based on some preliminary results that we had and some observations. I had a slide putting up a lot of data, a lot of when it was collected, where the contaminants were found, but I think it's probably more useful given time and to just kind of go through that. Basically, as we suspected, the results show that the site is a source of contaminants to groundwater, to soil, and to some of the off-site areas as well. And I think, as questions, I do have some numbers on some notes that I brought with me. I'm happy to go through some of them after the meeting. But without kind of seeing where the contaminants are and how deep they are, it's not very helpful. So we're in the process now of trying to put together what we call a conceptual site model, kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together and what the big picture is going to look like for not just McCaffrey and the landfill, but all the sites. So here's McCaffrey. Just to get into a little bit of the IRM that Sue mentioned to go along with the groundwater, or not the groundwater, but the alternative drinking water source investigation. The companies were required in the order to do an IRM to help address the well field. So right now we have some preliminary designs to go out and essentially capture the most contaminated groundwater that's coming from the site before it gets to the well field. You know, this is something we do at a lot of remediation sites statewide. We have a source, regardless of what the contaminant was. We try and pull the groundwater, keep it on site. So that's the intent of what this IRM is going to accomplish. As I mentioned, the design will be ongoing this summer, and we don't expect any significant impact to the yield or the capability of the well field to continue producing water. McCaffrey Street, next steps. So we've gotten some of this data back, the data summary reports. That gives us material to go to the companies with and say, okay, we're beginning to see and get those pieces of the puzzle, but we don't have all the pieces. We need an additional scope of work to go out and get the rest of the pieces of the puzzle. So we'll be talking about that with them in the next month or so. And that will just result in some additional investigation work. There may be additional interim remedial measures that result from seeing more of these puzzle pieces. So we're not going to rule those out. There may be more IRMs on the way. We will continue to expand soil and groundwater sampling programs. We're going to expand the analyte list. You know, right now we're looking for a bunch of the PFCs. We're going to expand it to include Gen X. We are beginning to look at the stack emissions and what the air dispersion may have looked like. That's going to be through probably a mix of modeling from the air side and confirmatory samples from the surface soil side. And other operational investigations, which will quite likely include actual stack testing on the facility to see what is being emitted now. And that, we're kind of working with EPA. They have the specialized equipment to be able to make that happen. So we're coordinating with them. Time frame is kind of up in the air right now. So going up to Liberty Street, really it's about the same story as McCaffrey at this point. The investigation has expanded to off-site areas based on the data that we have. We've received that data summary report. We're looking at it. And that summary covered all the samples that we've gotten through February February of 2018. Sorry, lost track of my calendar. And again, did I get lost here? We're going to, again, meet with the companies, develop an additional scope of work as needed to really go out and get that full nature of extent documented. And there may be IRM that makes sense out there as well. Again, same kind of slide as what we had on McCaffrey Street. We're going to include Gen X, start to look at the air deposition, and work with EPA to do the stack testing. So here we have kind of a general outline of the expanded areas that we've begun to look at. So former Oak, John Street. We have been doing, up to this point, a lot of monitoring wells. We've collected a lot of groundwater samples, a lot of soil samples. Again, a lot of that data is out there. We have basically what is a site characterization report. It's in with a work plan, so we're working through that, evaluating it. John Street was a little bit different. We had some chlorinated solvent issues. TCE was a contaminant. That contaminant has gotten down pretty deep into the soil column, down into groundwater, and as the chlorinated solvent, it's lighter than air, it off-gases, becomes a volatile organic compound. As you know, that can get into homes, get into people's basements and migrate throughout the house. So we've done the mitigation for the properties that we're aware of that were impacted, and we'll continue to do follow-up testing on those properties. We will be doing additional surface soil sampling and additional borings and monitoring wells to kind of keep stepping out, try to chase where that solvent has disappeared to. Just a quick mention on these potential sites. We have site characterizations that are either ongoing or will be performed. We will then make the determination of whether a full RI is needed, and once we get to the end of the site characterization. So, one other thing I want to mention is during the DEC's initial response, DEC staff collected a lot of tips from the general public where materials that were either generated or more likely used at the primary facilities in the village may have been taken off-site, whether there may have been people involved in transportation of those materials, either to the landfill or somewhere else. Those tips resulted in somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 40 additional, what we're calling additional disposal sites, where there may be PFOA present. So we've been tracking down those tips, going through all our notes. We've put together a couple figures, and we will be reaching out to the mayor. The mayor's aware that this is coming. We're going to be looking for the supervisor. We're going to be reaching out to the public. We will be sending letters out to the property owners that we've identified, asking for access to be able to come on and collect some samples. And we anticipate that happening pretty soon, late summer, early fall. Hopefully that will help maybe give us some more pieces to that puzzle that I keep talking about, why some of the areas, groundwater outside of the village appear to be impacted. So when we come out to do those soil samples, we'll also be putting in some temporary wells, collecting some groundwater, and we will provide whatever data we obtain to the property owner. And I just want to take a moment. I know her name and contact information is not on, I think it's the next slide, but Barbara Firebaugh is going to be the geologist for New York State who's heading up this task. So she may be reaching out to, if there's people in this room or the general public, property owners.
Actually, could I? Three questions on air. Sure. Because I didn't hear. Let me give you all three and then take them as they go. One, the original stacks at McCaffrey were removed, so can you talk a little bit about how exactly you'll model air dispersion? Two, a lot of people continually question, what am I smelling? There's a Title IV permit for Liberty Street. What are the three chemicals that are in that Title IV permit? I know you can look it up online, but I think it might be helpful if the community had an explanation of those three chemicals. What, if any, threat to human health comes with them? And then third question would be, how soon will we know what we smell from McCaffrey Street?
30 seconds, go.
Yeah, so first of all, I have to bring our air experts back in to walk you through that permit. We're happy to do that at one of the next meetings. With regard to air, I want to put this slide up, and perfect segue, Brian, because if there are any air quality issues that you're experiencing, smells on certain days or things like that, we need that data. Only resorting to social media isn't the best approach to getting us that data. by calling Ben in our regional office here, that creates a more legally defensible way of making sure we're getting accurate reports that we're then following up on. So Ben, anytime you smell something, I know this is on the village's website, or will be soon, and please do spread this out through the community to make sure that others are reporting this. So we can look at their permit requirements, let you know everything that's in there. There are two different sides to the plant that's there. There's the rubber side and then the PTFE side.
Which side are we talking about?
Well, I was talking about the Title IV permit for Liberty. They dispose of they have a permit to dispose of 3 chemicals by incineration in the air. And that's a different smell set up there, but like I will always say the chemical name's wrong, so I'm not going to.
I don't know the air.
Toluene, yeah,
Toluene?
yeah, that's one of them. So basically the 3, what are they, what do we have to worry about with them being incinerated at Liberty?
Sure.
But then McCaffrey, yes, the rubberized mat smell is the most offensive.
Yeah, so I think, Brian, what would be most effective is when we come back in the fall to have our air experts there to answer some of these questions and provide some of that info, because we're not the experts that know exactly the ins and outs of their permit,
Or
but
even
we're happy
even
to.
some sort of document, one sheet info
Sure.
ahead of time,
Yep.
so people will know sooner than later.
We can work to create that as well. Just on the rubber side of the plant, you'll see here on the bottom, we wanted to let you know that St. Cobain has come to us with the desire to install some pollution controls on that system to reduce the odors on that side of the operation. So we're working with them on the timeline and requirements to get that moving, but they expect to move on that pretty quickly. But again, if anyone is experiencing any air quality issues, please do call Ben. Mayor, do you have any? I got a couple more slides that I'll click through and then we'll
Why
go
don't
to
you
questions.
pop through your
too.
last few
Sure.
slides and then.
So, as I said, we're scheduling a fall availability session. We'll work with the mayor to do that. Obviously once school's back in session and once everyone's done with summer vacations and we get through the summer's worth of work that we talked about tonight, we'll provide some more updates, and we're looking to do that. We're also, we've heard loud and clear from some community members about wanting a community group. So we're looking to create that, and we're creating the framework for that we want to work with the mayor to get his feedback on and then take out to the community as well. We're modeling it after other Superfund sites where we've seen community groups be effective, like in Onondaga Lake. And again, this is going to provide another forum for people to stay engaged throughout the cleanup process and provide us recommendations on community engagement and just hear all these updates and work, help us work to get the right information out to the community. And then as part of that too, we've heard loud and clear from the mayor that having a sort of one-stop shop website for Hoosick Falls and the village and town and everything that's going on here would be helpful. So we're in the process, working with our colleagues at DOH to get that up and running in the coming weeks. You'll see a new website. We've heard the Bennington model is a good one to potentially follow, so we're looking at the way that they've created theirs and just making sure that there's room on there for DEC, DOH, EPA, village and town information to continue to get the word out. So I know we had a lot of stuff, and we're happy to take your questions and stay here as long as you need, but I just wanted to make sure that you had Sue and Ian and Will are 3 of our primary point people here. And obviously this information's on our website now, but take pictures of it or write it down, but we're always here for you to answer any questions you have. Mayor, do you want to start with board questions?
Board, any questions at this point? No? All right. Yeah, go.
Thank you.
1, 2, 3. And then anyone else after that.
I have a question regarding the monitoring of the air quality. Is there a way for the public to see a graph or a table on what days the air quality has decreased to what degree? The reason why I'm asking, I personally experience frequent headaches that we have medically limited. We have excluded everything I eat, am exposed to, laundry, anything you can think of. However, I have noticed, but I'm talking to a friend, when I tell her, yeah, I had one of those episodes again, she said, I called in the air quality yesterday. So is there a way for the public to look at this and chart it?
So some of the air quality things that our Division of Air tracks are online, and you can see like ozone and different things like that on days of the week. With regard to plant-specific things in the area or smells that you're smelling, we're still formulating that based on the information that we get. And this is why it's important to make sure people are calling and reporting anything to Ben in our Division of Air Resources in the region, just so we can better track what you're experiencing and what you're smelling, tracking that up against what we know their permit requirements are and what they're likely doing, and that can fine tune our regulatory ways of holding them accountable for anything that may be going wrong.
But there is, as of now, no means to look that up.
Well, I could put you in touch with our air folks, you can answer that question better, just how they do it, what data they have currently, and then, what information we need to move forward.
And keep asking that question, that's
Yep.
a good one. Yes?
In terms of site characterization, you mentioned that you're gonna expand the list of analytes, and you specifically mentioned Gen X.
Mhm.
Are you also gonna be looking at other polyfluorinated compounds? Because Gen X is just one of a list of like.
Yeah, there's
14.
a suite of 21 different perfluorinated compounds that we are studying now with all the sampling that we're taking
But I'm
around the
talking
government.
specifically about the polyfluorine, the ones that have oxygen on the chain, like Gen X, that have a slightly different structure but seem to be, based on the studies they've done around the Chemours plant in North Carolina, what they're using now. So Gen X is one of them, it's the one that's got the most recognition because it's got an easily recognizable name, but are you also going to be looking at those?
I mean, we could give you the full list of everything that we're sampling for, and all the data that we've talked about, we're obviously gonna put in the document repository that exists. We're gonna work to get up online on the new website so everyone can have access to that and see everything that they're sampling for.
Another question I had was whether the data summary reports are publicly available, that
Or-
you mentioned?
Yeah, we're going through them right now. I think they're gonna be releasable, but I need to double check and make sure on that.
But yeah, our goal is to get that out there as soon as they're ready, verified.
And I have one more.
Ian just said though, I mean, it's important, before we put data and information up, our scientists have to evaluate it and validate it, make sure it's accurate, and if something doesn't seem right, they require the companies to go back in and get the right data. So we wanna do our due diligence first before putting something out there, and then we also figure out exactly what we need to do next and can provide you a better picture of where we're going with the investigations.
Okay, and I have one other question. In terms of the interim remedial measures, so that somehow creating a barrier between the plant site and the well field, how effective is that really, given the persistence of these chemicals that essentially never break down in the environment? And also, how much do they protect the well field, given the fact that air deposition, it seems like, based on the analysis of other sites, is a major contributor.
Sure, I mean, Ian can probably go into more detail on hydraulic containment, but we have, plenty of experience around the state with sites like this where hydraulic containment has worked to contain certain contaminants. Obviously, this is an emergent contaminant, so we're going to have to do our due diligence, making sure we have the right data to show that it's going to work. But conceptually, as a model approach, we know that if you put interceptor wells ahead of where the groundwater is flowing into a well field and collect that, treat it, and restore it to the aquifer or discharge it to wherever to get it out of the aquifer, that is an effective way of stopping the migration of contaminants, as Ian said.
Also with contaminants that are persistent in the way that this chemical is, it just.
Yep. It's, we're exploring that with, if you're familiar with Long Island and the Grumman contamination plume, looking at chlorinated solvents and other contaminants, VOCs in the groundwater there. I mean, they have a plume that's now 2 miles wide by 4 miles long, and we're exploring hydraulic containment of that right now and putting in wells to do it. And we have a lot of conceptual models that we've built for that, and we've done it on other locations as well.
Yes.
Have they tested where Flowmatic used to be and the paper mill used to be? Paperboard?
They're, I can tell you, I know Brown's well is non-detect, and they've had no issues up there. Their water supply is great, and that was actually cleaned up at some point for some copper, I believe, if Flowmatic was there. Or there was an element of that where that site has been remediated. There's no PFOA there or PFCs.
But it hasn't been retested.
Well, yeah, I would say, I can't speak for a business, but they put millions of dollars into it. They keep an eye on that, and
What about paperboard? 'Cause they
Columbia
had acid
Paperboard.
pits.
Where is paperboard?
Columbia Paperboard was Columbia Box, yeah. I know there was a Superfund site near there, but I don't know how that would relate to.
It's on the river. It all comes, it's right on the river that comes down through.
I think truthfully, let's talk and look at a map and you can point it to it and we can figure out, you know,
I think the river flows away from the village up that direction.
No, the Loomsack flows right along it to
The
the.
Loomsack comes right down,
Okay.
goes right
Okay.
past our
All right.
road.
All right.
Yes,
I
it's
know
going,
they
it
found
dumps
something
into
in
the
Cambridge
north,
as well.
correct.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say in general, this is why we like to talk to the community to get other examples of things that we should be looking at, because we need to know the history of these areas
Yes.
and, you know, what may else have been going on, so we're always happy to track that down
Okay.
and get
Yes.
answers. Lorraine?
What has been done, or is being done, or is going to be done, about what's coming out of the stacks currently at those facilities? Because I haven't heard any data at all about that. What do we know that's coming out of there still? What do we know, is it being measured? We can all make an educated guess that it's Gen X, although they don't have to tell us. But what's being done to monitor that for those of us that live here still? We still don't know what's coming out.
Yep, so they have specific, and this is why we'll have a specific air segment at the next community meeting, so you can ask our air experts exactly this. But they have specific requirements, permit requirements, and all that data is presented to DEC, so our air quality experts do have some information. With regard to the stat tests that Ian spoke about, we're working with EPA to get the new technology that they have to be able to take more detailed emissions tests for perfluorinated compounds potentially coming out of the stacks. And that's gonna give us more data. And, you know, EPA actually has the scientific process and methods and equipment to be able to do that. So what we're doing is, you know, working to get them to do it. So far, the companies have complied with a willingness to do it. Now we're just lining up the right testing protocols to do that, and we'll, you know, as soon as we have data that's back, we'll be able to present it to the community.
Yes.
Emma?
Will you use the same for Petersburg if you haven't already done it in the previous?
Yeah, we required a stack test at Petersburg previously, not using EPA's new scientific tools, but in the past, and I don't believe we found any air deposition in Petersburg, but again, I'll have to check with our air experts on that. We're happy to talk to you about that.
But in the interim too, I do think prior to that meeting, to know, again,
Sure.
info about what's being incinerated at Liberty Street, also what is in the rubberized smell.
Yeah.
You know, it's great to go for a run in the morning on the Greenway, and I used to go home and drink the water, and that was a bad idea until now it's okay, but I'm still breathing that, and other people are. I'd like to know, what is the rubber smell? What is in that?
Sure.
Could we get an update at our next regular meeting in a couple weeks?
Sure, we'll work to get our folks there to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just a quick question, just for my ability to kind of comprise an org chart in my head. So Ben Potter, I know he's with the Division of Air Resources. What is his official title?
Air Engineer 1 or something, 4 or something like that. I mean, I'll get his exact title, but basically he is on our air staff in the DEC Region 4, which encompasses the capital region on east this way.
The second question I have is to try to control the contamination from McCaffrey Street from continuing to migrate. Somebody else had also talked about this. You say that you use hydraulic system of containment and then treatment. Does that treatment include a GAC filtration system similar to what we're using here?
Yep.
Yep.
Pretty much the same thing.
And what happens to that spent carbon?
We haven't determined what happens to the spent carbon yet. We did learn that, you know, some of the vendors out there actually take the carbon back, regenerate it off-site, and then send it right back to the same system. So they're capable of recycling it.
And cleaning the contaminant out of it?
Yep.
All right, I want to take this moment to thank DOH and DEC members. I also want to thank, I know that the town board has members here. I know both of our county legislators are here as well, so thank you guys. And I want to thank all of you for coming out. I don't care if you like everything we're doing or are 100% critical. I want you guys to stay involved, keep asking questions, keep pushing issues, because that's what's driving things forward here. We have one more piece of business we're going to move on to, but I think that they're going to be around if you have any follow-up questions.
We will. And Mayor, as I said before, I mean, we're not leaving this community until the job's done. You know, we intend to be fixtures here. We have staff here.
On a regular basis. The mayor calls me around the clock sometimes, every day of the week. But we're here for you, and we want to make sure if you have questions that you get answers, and that's what we're here for. So we're always happy to do things like this. Thanks,
All right.
Mayor.
Thank you. One other piece of business, I am looking for a motion to reappoint Corey Wagner, part-time police officer, effective June 29th, 2018.
Second.
Brian, second Bobby. Any further discussion on this?
It'll be great to have Corey back.
It will absolutely be great to have Corey back. I appreciate his interest to come back to the community. Love that. All right. We have the motion and already seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Wait.
Brian and Bobby
Brian,
seconded.
yeah.
In that case, with no other, did you want to give an update?
I'm happy to. Take 2 minutes.
2 minutes. I do have one more update I want to get out to the community. So Andy, if you please. This is, I would say this is still an important update, which is why I'm sort of want to get it out there. There's not really much extra we're going to be able to say about it, but our village attorney, Andy Gilchrist, is going to give the board and community an update on one more item of business.
This looks like some light reading, Andy.
This is a 2-minute presentation.
This
Okay.
Oh, my God.
No. That's just for you to hold on to, okay?
And read it all tonight.
Not read it tonight.
I'm just kidding.
Oh, this is one that.
Yep, and these two are.
So you may or may nice for people to stay.
You may want to stay for this one because this is important. If not, that's totally fine. But this has some important business, especially for people who've been following things for the past few years.
So this is for the.
Can you stand, Tress? Yes. Do you want to use the mic?
Yeah.
Let's mic you up. Over there. Yep.
So what I'm updating the board on is one piece of pending litigation against the village. And if you don't know me, I've been here since October. Andy Gilchrist, I'm the new village attorney, retained by the village last October. One of the reasons Dave Engel is here is he was likewise retained as new environmental outside counsel for the village dealing with the PFOA contamination. As the residents and the board are well aware, there was a prior law firm that was also working on this issue for the village. That law firm was dismissed as counsel, outside environmental counsel for the village, and Dave Engel and Nolan and Heller were retained. The issue has come up, if you are not aware, that the prior law firm, Fitzgerald Morris Baker and Firth, has demanded to be paid by the village for those services. It is a significant amount of money. The law firm did file with the village last November what is called a statement of claim. And that claim totals $582,000, plus or minus. Now, that was a precursor to starting a lawsuit against the village. I can tell you that the village board and my office used every effort to try to resolve that outstanding claim for legal fees prior to the end of 2017. We were not successful. Earlier this year in May, the firm did file a lawsuit against the village seeking payment of the $582,000. My office is defending that litigation. What I'm going to update the board on tonight is today we did serve and file a motion with the court to try to dismiss a substantial portion of the claim. It's on various legal bases, most having to do with the timeliness of the claim, the manner in which invoices were provided. That motion will now be pending with the court. Fitzgerald Morris's counsel has every right to respond to that motion, and they will do so in July. We will have a chance to reply to that, and then the court will decide. This motion does not dismiss the case in total, but it does seek dismissal of a substantial amount of this claim. So I did want to update the board on that very generally, but just so everyone is aware, and the board certainly has been, they've been dealing with this issue for some time. It is a substantial claim against the village of Hoosick Falls, and we are trying to defend the village against that claim.
Jackie Hogan, Eastwood Press, wanted to know what that amount is going to be dismissed, that substantial amount.
In round numbers,
Of the 582.
let me do the math in my head.
Okay.
About $460,000 of it they're seeking to have dismissed.
There's really not much else we can say
That was
because
all.
it's a pending litigation, so.
I will tell you that, and I know the board may not like this, but while the case is litigating in court, my litigation approach is not to litigate the matter in the press. We will give the board updates as we go. I litigate my cases in court, as does Mr. Engel. We don't litigate in the press. We give updates. We advise the board of the status of the case and get direction. But that's what happened today, is we have filed a motion seeking to have a substantial portion of the claim dismissed.
Second question, do you have liability insurance that covers that?
This is not a lie. This would be a contract claim, so it is not covered by general liability insurance.
All right, thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Andy.
In that case, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Bobby?
Second.
Second, Brian. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you all very much. Meeting adjourned at 8:38.